Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas. In his Catholic faith is day 190. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 144 and 145 of the Secunda Secundae, that is, of shamefacedness and of honesty. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code Summa 10. And so here we go. Article 1, whether shamefacedness is a virtue. Our definition of shamefacedness is given by St. Thomas in the following words. Shamefacedness is fear of a base action. Now, if virtue and the virtuous man denote a kind of excellence, then in one way shamefacedness will not be considered a virtue, because the excellent virtuous man is not afraid of falling into base, lewd, sensual kinds of sins. He knows himself to be above these childish things. Yet on the other hand, if virtue is taken in a more general sense, for that which is good and praiseworthy in human acts and passions, then shamefacedness will be considered a virtue, for it is good and praiseworthy as an act to fear base action and disgrace, for these are evils, and the good man will see them as such. Article 2, whether shamefacedness is about disgraceful action. All the vices have to do with disgraceful action insofar as vice causes action to be deficient and then worthy of disgrace, at least in the very eyes of God. However, sins of intemperance are not only disgraceful in the eyes of God, but ordinarily in the eyes of man. The fornicator, adulterer, glutton, drunkard, these people are held as disgraceful by essentially all, and therefore it is a specific integral virtue of temperance to be afraid of disgraceful action. In St. Thomas's words, disgrace is penal, so to speak, and it consists in the reproach that attaches to a person, just as the clarity of glory consists in a person being honored. And since this reproach has the character of an arduous evil, just as honor has the character of an arduous good, shamefacedness, which is fear of disgrace, regards first and foremost reproach or ignominy. Article 3, whether man is more shamefaced of those who are more closely connected with him. And this is a great article and meditation for us to prayerfully consider those whose opinions matter to us and why their opinion matters to us. Both honor and disgrace denote the attestation, that's Aquinas' word here, the witness from another to our goodness in the case of honor, or wickedness in the case of disgrace. It's not just about being good or evil. Honor and disgrace have to do with being judged or seen as good or evil. So who are we more afraid of judging us as evil or as disgraceful? And clearly it will be those who have the best judgment of things. Their opinion of us is going to encourage or dishearten us the most. What Jesus Christ thinks of me means the world to me, and hopefully to all those listening to this. But what a child thinks of me or yourself likely doesn't matter to us. Now, those who are close to us can seem to us to have an accurate opinion of us because of their extensive knowledge of our history, our actions, our choices. Thus, all things being equal, we will fear to be disgraceful in their eyes more than others. However, the weight of our fear can shift based on what Aquinas calls the effect of certain people's judgments of us. So, if the judgment of your boss is more likely to make or break your life, then you might be more afraid of being held in disgrace by him than those who might actually be better judges of your character. And so lastly, by way of summary of much of what we've said, Aquinas writes here, people of the better sort make us ashamed for the same reason as those who are more closely connected with us. Because just as the attestation of the better man carries more weight since they have a more universal knowledge of things and in their judgments hold fast to the truth, so too the attestation of those among whom we live is more cogent, since they know more about our concerns in detail. Article 4, whether even virtuous men can be ashamed. In a sentence, which we can then explain, Aquinas writes, a lack of shame occurs in the best and the worst men through different causes. In the average men it is found, and insofar as they have a certain love of good and yet are not altogether free from evil. In other words, totally depraved people do not fear disgrace because they do not take the evil things they do to merit disgrace. And that's just like Jesus Christ despised the shame of the cross, as it says in Hebrews, because he knew himself unworthy of it. So too evil people are not ashamed or fear the disgrace which may occur from the evil they do. On the opposite end of the spectrum, neither does the virtuous man fear shame, for the reason Christ did not fear shame, as we've already mentioned, but also because when it comes to voluntary culpable sins, the virtuous man does not see such evils as possible for him to fall into, and so does not fear the possibility of them. But for the average man, to use Aquinas' term, the fear of disgrace, which may follow intemperate acts, does occur, and it's quite useful in keeping such a one from conducting such acts. For the man afraid of being caught and disgraced as an adulterer is simply less likely to become an adulterer to begin with. In conclusion, in response to our article, we can say with Aristotle that a virtuous man is not shamefaced. Moving then on to question 145 on honestum, which we can translate honesty. We can also translate it nobility or decency, and sadly, I'm not convinced that any of these English translations are going to be helpful to us, so I'm simply going to leave the word in the Latin, honestum, as we move forward. Article 1, whether honestum is the same as virtue. St. Isidore says, honestum means an honorable state. And to be in an honorable state, to be worthy of honor because of what one is, one's character is the same as being virtuous. As the article goes on to say, now honor is due to excellence, and the excellence of a man is gauged chiefly according to his virtue. Therefore, properly speaking, honestum refers to the same thing as virtue. Article 2, whether honestum is the same as the beautiful. A great reminder is given within this article on the ingredients of beauty, which we covered in episode 4 of the podcast. A thing is beautiful insofar as Dionysius says there is a concurrence, we could say convergence, of clarity and due proportion. So the most beautiful man is first of all one whose physical members are of the right size and shape and in the right place relative to others. This is due proportion. But second of all, and arguably most of all, the beautiful man is the one who most clearly shines forth the idea of man, what God had in mind when he made man. And this definitely entails virtue. For as Scripture says, God created man in his own image and likeness, and that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. So honestum, by being synonymous with virtue, is also beautiful. In St. Thomas's words, and in response to our article, the beauty of the body consists in a man having his bodily limbs well proportioned together with a certain clarity of color. In like manner, spiritual beauty consists in a man's conduct or actions being well proportioned in respect of the spiritual clarity of reason. Now, this is what is meant by honestum. So due proportion of the body equals physical beauty, and due proportion of the soul, or we could say more scientifically, due subordination of one's passions and actions to reason, and reason to God's revelation is what makes for spiritual beauty or clarity. Article 3, whether honestum differs from the useful and the pleasant. The three converge in the same subject, so the same beautiful, useful, honestum thing. For the virtuous man is not only fittingly described by the term honestum, but he's also beautiful. For the reasons we've described already, he's also useful because virtue is a kind of power, capability, and these make him pleasant to others. We take to be pleasing, according to St. Thomas, those things which are becoming, seemly to the mind or to the sense. And since the virtuous man agrees with what we get man to be, a creature whose actions are to be ruled and subordinate by right reason, then knowledge of the virtuous man is pleasant to us. So again, honestum, beauty, usefulness, pleasantness converge in the virtuous man, but these realities are not thereby identical. As Aquinas tells us here, and in response to our article, they differ in aspect. For a thing is said to be honest as having a certain excellence, deserving of honor on account of its spiritual beauty, while it is said to be pleasing as bringing rest to desire, and useful as referred to something else. The pleasant, however, extends to more things than the useful and the honest, since whatever is useful and honest is pleasing in some respect. Then on to our last article, Article 4, whether honestum should be reckoned a part of temperance. If honestum is a kind of spiritual beauty, synonymous with being in an honorable state, with being virtuous, then why doesn't it fall as an integral part of justice, perhaps? And the reason it is specifically an integral part of temperance is because, first of all, it is diametrically opposed to the other integral part of temperance, which is the fear of being disgraced through falling into crude, base pleasures. This is the opposite of being spiritually beautiful, which temperance especially protects. And this motivates temperance in keeping a man from pursuing those things which would tarnish his beauty, his honor. Therefore, honestum is especially attributed to temperance as a motivating reason for temperance and as the effect of temperance, preserving a man from a disgrace, spiritual ugliness. Giving the last word of our episode to St. Thomas, he teaches, honestum belongs especially to temperance, since the latter repels that which is most disgraceful and unbecoming to man, namely animal lust. Also, by its very name, temperance is most signifying of the good of reason to which it belongs to moderate and temper evil desires. Accordingly, honestum is an integral part or condition attaching thereto for temperance. And with that, we close another episode. We have just finished covering questions 144 and 145 of the Secunda Secundae, that is, of shamefacedness and of honestum. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.